muddled and incoherent thoughts. Of course, he is rushed for medical attention, but unfortunately ends up passing away in the early morning hours. Now, it is unclear exactly what killed Edgar Allan Poe. There are many theories. One thing we do know for sure, though, is that his work lives on. Starting in 1949 and lasting for half a century, an individual known only as the Poe Toaster visits the gravesite of Edgar Allan Poe every year on the eve of his birthday, leaving a partial bottle of cognac along with 3 solitary roses at the site. A grim reminder that none of us can escape death, friends. But like Edgar Allan Poe, we can all leave a brilliant legacy behind. With this, we proudly present our 4th and final piece of the evening, the Masque of Red Death. Enjoy.
Red Death had long been feeding on the country. No sickness had ever been so great a killer, or so fearful to see. Its mark was blood, along with sharp pains and the mind racing around in circles inside the head. And then there was the bleeding through the skin, though it was not cut or broken. And then death. The bright red spots upon the face and body of the sick man caused other men to turn away from him. They were too afraid to try and help, and the sickness lasted from beginning to end no more than half an hour. But when Prospero, the ruler of that land, saw that half the people of his land had died, he called into him 1,000 healthy, happy friends, and with them he went far away to live in one of his palaces. Now this was a tall, beautiful building made of stone, and it was surrounded by a strong wall with gates of iron. And there, Prospero would provide everything needed for pleasure. There was music, and there was dancing. They had food to eat and cocktails to drink. Cheers, my friend. All of these things were there within the walls, where they would be able to feel safe and could forget about the sickness of the Red Death. They would leave the outside world to care for itself. Now, after 3 months passed, Prospero asked his friends to gather for a masquerade party to help lift their spirits. Everyone was to come dressed in their finest clothes and their finest mask. This was a scene of great richness, that masquerade. There were 7 rooms in which the friends of Prospero danced. In his wily palace, little more than 1 room could be seen at a time. In each room, there were 3 tall, pointed windows of colored glass, the same color used in each room. In the first room, there were blue cloth hangings on the wall, and blue were its windows. In the second room, the cloth hangings were purple, and purple were its windows. In the third room, green, the fourth room, yellow, the fifth room, white, and the sixth room was of violet. But in the 7th room, the cloth hangings were black, as dark as night, and the floor too was covered in the same heavy black cloth. But in this room, the windows were red, a deep blood color. Now each room cast a strange light indeed, as it colored the faces of the dancers inside, so much so that very few dared to enter the red room because of the awfully familiar sight of Red Death that it bore. The red room. In the corner of the room there stood a tall black clock of wood that gently marked the seconds as they passed. At the top of each hour, it spoke with a deep, loud, beautiful tone. As beautiful as music, but so strange that the music and the dancing would stop. And the few masqueraders standing inside would stand still and listen to it speak. But nevertheless, this was a beautiful masquerade party as the dancers moved gently through the rooms throughout the night. At the top of the hour, the clock would speak, the music and the dancing would stop, and the few masqueraders standing inside would stand still and listen to the slow striking sound. But this time, before the clock could silence itself, the masqueraders noticed that in the first room, the blue room, there was a strange masquerader that no one had seen before. And as they began to whisper about him amongst themselves, a feeling of surprise spread through the room. And then, sickening terror. Now in a group such as this, only a strange masquerader could have caused such a feeling. He was tall, and he was very thin, and he was dressed from head to foot like a dead man ready for the grave. And his face looked like that of a dead man too, so much so, the nearest eye could not tell the difference. And all of this would have been fine and well, except the strange masquerader whom no one knew had dressed himself like the Red Death itself. His clothes were covered in spots of blood, and the mask covering his face was covered in red spots, or perhaps it was indeed his face. But when Prospero came into the blue room and he looked upon the stranger, he cried, "Who dares? Take him! Seize him! Pull off his mask so we may know whom to hang at sunrise." Many of the dancers came rushing into the room and they went to grab hold of the masquerader, but then they stopped in fear. They were afraid. And the stranger began to make his way through the rooms, and no one dared to lay a hand on him. He passed within a few feet of Prospero, who stood still. He was surprised. And the stranger began to make his way through the rooms with a slow, measured step. From the blue room into the purple room, from the purple room into the green room, from the green room into the yellow room, from the yellow room into the white room, from the white room and into the violet, and no one dared to go after him except Prospero. Prospero chased after the stranger with a sharp knife and he went to strike him. But the masquerader turned and he looked him in his eyes. And then there came a great cry, and the shining knife fell on the black floor, covered in blood. And then Prospero fell dead. Many of the dancers, the strongest of the strong, came rushing into the room, and they went to grab hold of the masquerader. But when they grabbed him, they found his grave clothes. There was no body, no human form. That's when they knew that somehow in the night, the Red Death had entered the room. Instantly, all of the dancers fell dead. And then the music stopped, and the fire went out, and into the darkness and the decay of the night, the Red Death ruled forever.